Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Nest briefing. I am Katia Glod, Deputy Head of Foreign Policy at Nest Center, and I will be moderating our discussion today. We are joined today by Konstantin Eggert, journalist, commentator, and roving correspondent for Deutsche Welle, and one of the most insightful voices on Russian foreign and domestic politics. Konstantin has special expertise also in the Middle East. He has spent time living and working in the region, and therefore he's very well familiar with the politics in that part of the world. Today, we'll look at how the Kremlin interprets the US-brokered ceasefire in Gaza, what Moscow's absence from the Sharm el-Sheikh summit says about its standing in the Middle East, and how these developments might shape Trump's efforts to end the war in Ukraine. As always, please feel free to post your questions in the chat, and I will try to bring them into the discussion as we go. Well, Konstantin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks to Nest and to you, Katia.
Well, before we turn to the current situation, I would like perhaps to start with recalling what Russia's interests and positions are in the Middle East. As far as I understand, and please correct me, Konstantin, if I'm wrong, but basically for years, the Kremlin has seen the region as a stage to prove that it is still a global power and to challenge the United States. Its main goals have been to secure a military foothold, and especially in Syria because of the military bases there, and also to show that it can talk to everyone, be it Israel, Iran, Turkey, or the Arab states. The 2015 intervention in Syria, I think, was the peak of that strategy. And as I said, it gave Russia lasting air naval bases and restored its presence in the Mediterranean. But since the war in Ukraine, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it seems that Moscow's role has become weaker and more defensive. Of course, it still has the bases. It still has the OPEC Plus partnership with Saudi Arabia and arms deals, but it seems like it has much less diplomatic weight at the moment. And now the United States has reasserted itself through the Gaza ceasefire. And I think the question is really what Russia still has as leverage in the region, or has it become a bystander? So, Konstantin, how does the Kremlin view the current deal that American President Trump has been able to broker? What does Russia's absence from the summit tell us about its place in the Middle East today, and whether you agree at all? Do you agree with my perspective on how I see Russia's role to date in the region?
Well, it's not a very good start for discussion to agree with someone, but definitely I agree. It's very clear that the Kremlin was sidelined and sidelined deliberately. I would say what's interesting is that it seems like at least none of the partners in the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, which hosted nearly three dozen heads of state and government, no one there said, well, by the way, why don't we have at least someone from Moscow, at least Lavrov? Okay, probably that's not a very good idea, but still. I think that this means that, symbolically speaking, Russia's been knocked off a fairly low peg already. It's low peg already in the Middle East. And to me, it looks like, well, it's definitely no longer not even a major, but just a player in the Israeli-Palestinian track of negotiations, or whatever you call it, because negotiations switched to war in the Middle East in a matter of 5 seconds. I would say that Russia's previous sort of a viewish claim to influence was based on its tight connections and long-standing connections to the Palestinian Authority, to the administration in Ramallah. But Mahmoud Abbas, who studied in Moscow, who wrote a dissertation there, who is essentially a very old Moscow client there, he's 90 plus. He's going to leave the stage soon. And What will happen after that? I think Moscow will have very little impact on that. And also, symbolism matters in the Middle East. This disinvitation or lack of invitation to Sharm el-Sheikh showed to the Arab heads of state and government that, well, essentially Putin is negligible for the United States. And if he is negligible to the United States, then for them he's even less important. It doesn't mean that Russia will leave the Middle East immediately. It still has interests there, but definitely it's been its weight has been very much reduced. I would like to mention that, of course, you rightly reminded us about the intervention in Syria in 2015. It happened on the 30th of September, so we just marked 10th anniversary of this. And if you look back at then, everyone admiring Putin's audacity and the swiftness with which Russians went into Syria and how they started to really impact what happened on the battlefield, and compare it to today. Today, Putin depends on a host of regional players even to keep these bases, which are actually, I've seen them, they are not huge. I would call the naval base rather naval station than the base. But now he cannot keep them independently. You mentioned them. It is important for Putin not just as a sign of prestige, although I do agree that since the days of the Soviets, the region was always first and foremost of all like a football pitch on which Russia played out its global games with the United States and the U.S. allies. But for Putin, securing this basis, and we can talk about it a bit later, is important also because it's just Russia's presence in Eastern Mediterranean that is quite visible. It is a supply line. That's why it's very important for him to keep the bases. It is a supply. It maintains the supply line to Russia's ally in Libya, Field Marshal Khalifa al-Haftar, and to what used to be the Wagner mercenaries. Now it's called the Africa Corps of the Russian Defense Ministry in sub-Saharan Africa, in Central African Republic, in Niger, in other countries where they have a huge business. Essentially, it's a huge business operation for the Kremlin. So I think that, coming back to your question, it is very significant that Putin was not invited to Sharm el-Sheikh. No one from Moscow came. It is definitely a very visible symbol of the diminution of Russian power, although it remains, as you rightly said, a member of OPEC Plus and things like that. But if you wish, the feeling lingers. Russia's defeat in Syria in 2024, the swiftness with which Bashar al-Assad was kicked out, the swiftness with which the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the Pasdaran, were kicked out of Syria, is, I think, then everyone understood that Russia's power in the Middle East stands on very thin ice. Well, we don't have much ice in the Middle East, but still. And I suppose that what we've seen in Egypt is just basically something that proves that this trend is really a trend and not some kind of accident fluke of history.
Very interesting. I think you've, Konstantin, delineated these new trends very well, and particularly also explains their basis in Syria, which indeed pose a question. Well, what's now? Why does the Putin regime still need them? Let's just stay for a moment on Syria, and I'm very interested to know how you interpret the recent visit of Ahmad al-Sharaa, the new Syrian president, to Moscow at the same time when basically the deal has been struck on the Middle East. So do you see this as some sort of pragmatic adjustment of Putin and his presidential administration to how the things are now? Because before, obviously, they have called this regime terrorist and they did not want to deal with them. So how do you read this visit to Moscow?
It is a very significant visit because when I watched the Ahmad al-Sharaa motorcade drive through Moscow with the sirens and the police escort and or rather FSB escort, I thought, wow, this is how a defeated Putin receives the winner. And you rightly said he used to be called Abu Muhammad al-Julani, head of terrorists in Syria. Now he's just a legitimate president of Syria, Ahmed al-Sharaa, by the way, you probably paid attention, with a very finely cut suit. And I think that this is a very interesting event because it involves not only Russia and Syria, it also involves Turkey and involves Israel. For Putin, keeping the bases is very, very important for reasons that I described. And al-Sharaa is the man to say yes or no eventually. And why did he say yes to the bases, and why there was no, at least we don't know, of any demand to render the fugitive former Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad to Syria? I think because there is Assad is a man of the past. Of course, I'm sure, by the way, that Sharaa probably even did not demand it from Putin that Assad be sent to Damascus, because that would have been such a humiliation to Putin that basically he would say no anyway. You can't do it. You lose all last vestiges of your credibility in case he did. So I'm sure that Sharaa didn't ask for that. He's in a much bigger game. Syria, where I've been many times, is ruined. It needs literally probably trillions of dollars or pounds to reconstruct itself, to be repaired. Essentially, it wasn't particularly rich and affluent in the first place before the war, and it needs internal stability. And here into play come Turkey and Israel. Recep Erdogan is the main proponent now of the government in Damascus. It's main prop. The Turks expanded their embassy. They were the first, I think, to start flying regular flights by Turkish Airlines to Damascus. And this is a problem for Israel because Israel is now in what is a de facto Cold War with Turkey. And for Netanyahu, and I heard it many times when I was in Israel recently, that Netanyahu is very interested in other countries' presence in Syria because that counterbalances the Turkish impact. Also, of course, for Netanyahu, it is an opening, a possibility to sign a deal with Syria of a kind that never was contemplated any time since the 1948 Israeli War of Independence, the first Israeli War, as they also call it. And for him, interestingly enough, the presence of Russian bases there is one of those levers which will contain the Turkish influence, which will basically ensure that someone else is on the ground to monitor the situation, to be able to intervene in it, potentially. And I was told by my sources in Jerusalem that actually this idea of keeping the bases was very much promoted by the Israelis in their back channel conversations with al-Sharaa's people. I don't mean that al-Sharaa was just only following the Israeli sort of suggestions, but it's very clear that Jerusalem is interested in that. So I think by now we have a situation which maybe very soon there's going to be not a full sort of interstate relationship between Damascus and Jerusalem, between Syria and Israel, but maybe it comprehends, at least that's what I'm hearing, a comprehensive sort of security treaty, which will ensure that Syria will never be a basis for hostile action against Israel. And this means that Israel will be interested in maintaining the current Syrian government insecurity and stability. And I want to remind you, sorry, that in 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israeli tanks were rolled into Syria, and they were about maybe 30 kilometers from Damascus. So it's very swift. Why I don't think there's going to be, just as we're on it anyway, I do not think there's going to be a full treaty a la the treaty Israel has with Egypt or with the United Arab Emirates, with embassies and kind of the full Monty. It's because I don't think there's a possibility of solving the problem of the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights very soon. And Netanyahu, I don't think he wants to give it up. The Druze that live there don't want Israel to give it up. So maybe it's going to be a security treaty and not much more than that. However, if you look at it, in this situation, Putin is rather used as a tool than plays his own game. So this tells you, I think, what kind of situation Russia is currently in the region, in the Mashriq.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Also, on the background on what you're saying about Israel and personal relationship between Putin and Netanyahu seemingly having deteriorated, particularly, over the past few years. I would like maybe to move on further on the role of Hamas and particularly Kremlin's negotiations with Hamas, and how in your view does the Kremlin use Hamas? Is it just for its own propaganda? Is it really trying to use it to present itself as an alternative mediator in the region? What's there behind, this sort of engagement of two very nasty regimes?
I would say that as a mediator, I'd rather see the Dalai Lama. I think there's a better chance of him becoming a mediator there than Putin. Putin's reputation is such that just lots of people in there, including, by the way, the Israeli public opinion, will not accept him as a mediator. In terms of influence, well, I'd say that you still have Qatar and to some extent Iran as much bigger influences within Hamas and on Hamas. Mm-hmm. Russia definitely had its agents inside. There is still an ongoing debate about who knew what about the preparations for October the 7th. In Israel, I keep hearing from different people that they are absolutely certain that, bearing in mind a very sort of close relationship between Moscow, Tehran, and the Hamas leaders, it is impossible that Russia didn't know about the planning of the 7th of October atrocity. But that remains to be seen. I don't want to speculate. I suppose that Putin can still talk to Hamas. I think that probably has a bit more leverage in Ramallah, among the Fatah leaders, although there it's also very uncertain because of Mahmoud Abbas's sort of, how to put it mildly, longevity in his position. A lot of people that could have been sort of agents of Moscow influence have also left the scene. They're pretty old. And the new ones, they are different. They did not look up to the Soviet Union in their youth and their formative years towards the Soviet Union as this great force in the Middle East, a great anti-American force. So they have probably other priorities. I do not think, to sum it up, that Putin has any kind of major influence on Hamas, and that completely excludes him. Not only this, but this also completely excludes him as some kind of influence. And I must say that if you look at the Russian state media and Russian sort of Z telegram channels, as we call them, the patriotic pro-Putin propagandist channels, some of the stuff they publish about the Middle East is satirical. For example, a mother of one of the hostages suddenly thanking Putin for releasing her son. This is, I mean, I may explain it probably because they have some relatives in Russia and they want to keep their property or whatever, but it is ridiculous that you have these mentions instead of presence of Sharm el-Sheikh as some kind of real influence. And one last thing, one has to remember, in the Middle East, money also plays a role. Currently, I do not think that waging a war of aggression against Ukraine and not waging it particularly successfully, Russia can save any kind of meaningful financial or military assistance to its remaining allies. I mean, I think Haftar will be the one who still receives something from the Russians, the mercenaries in Africa, but otherwise, I think that, for example, people like Hamas were anyway supplied mostly by the Iranians and with the use of Qatari money. So, frankly, I think that even this avenue is not particularly sort of promising in terms of maintaining or promoting Russian influence.
Well, Konstantin, let's zoom in more on the deal itself. And you already started talking about how different elements and channels within Russia have interpreted the deal. So I have two questions to you in this regard. First one, how do you see the Moscow's own interpretation of the deal? Does it take it as success, as a precedent, as competition, a threat? And in this regard, what kind of messages is it trying to send to domestic audiences? How does it try to present the Gaza ceasefire and the US role in it?
Well, first of all, they are not paying as much attention to it as they still pay to Ukraine. The war against NATO, as it is presented by the Russian state media and the state-promoted channels on social media, is still the number one topic by far. Because Putin was not invited, it was a pretty low-key coverage. Russia's torn between the Russian propaganda, the administration of Vladimir Putin, is torn between its desire to switch on the old mode of Israel bashing, which would be liked by certain quarters in the Arab world, and maybe even the so-called Arab street, but they can't do it because they very much depend on the good graces of Netanyahu. And with Netanyahu showing what Israel can do to Russia's remaining, by the way, we didn't mention it or mentioned it very much sort of bypassing, to Russia's main ally in the region, main remaining ally in the region, this is Iran. Frankly, if I were Putin, I would say, well, do it hush hush. Don't do much about it. And I think Netanyahu knows it, that Putin is a dependent position now. And the fact that Israel did not get much fire for actually increasing its help to Ukraine, by the way, sending air defense systems, to me is a testimony that Putin understands he's weak against Israel. And if we look forward towards what I think will be a very significant Israeli military domination in the whole region of the Levant, because if there is an Israeli security agreement with Syria, it will de facto also cover Lebanon. It will basically let the Israelis have a kind of full control of Lebanon. They won't if they can. Rather, they can if they won't. Now, I'm sorry. If Iran couldn't do anything against the Israeli Air Force and Israeli missiles, I mean, Lebanon is a pretty much failed state today. They can't do anything. But if you look at the map, Israel can, because of that, can do pretty much, because of its predominance in the Eastern Mediterranean, can do pretty much anything to those bases. And I think that Putin understands it. So the coverage was fairly low key. Ukraine is still the main topic. And I think it will remain such because there is, frankly, nothing much to boast in the Middle East for Putin. And I think that they understand it pretty well.
Mm. Well, before we move to the implications for Ukraine, I would like to bring in some questions. And there are two at the moment. One from Angela Stent from Brookings. After October the 7th, 2023, Russia's relations with Israel cooled. Do you expect them to revive now, or has Putin decided to maintain this distancing?
Well, I think that this they cooled. Angela, by the way, hello, lovely to hear from you. I do think they cooled, but I think that there is an interest both in Jerusalem and in Moscow to maintain them. And I think that this interest will persevere. As long as Putin has a certain foothold in the Middle East, I don't think that Netanyahu will go and sort of fully turn tables on Putin. Also, Netanyahu, as you know pretty well, is very much attuned to kind of the smells coming out of Washington, and the smell coming out of Washington concerning Russia is not exactly fully negative. Well, it's not Reagan-esque, if you wish. So I suppose that this relationship will be there on a very pragmatic case-by-case basis. There is a new Israeli ambassador now in Moscow who I think has an ability to navigate these waters pretty well. And at the same time, I do not think we are going to go back to Netanyahu kind of talking about his friend Vladimir every week. I think this is gone now. Also, as you rightly mentioned, the Israeli public opinion is definitely quite a lot of the Israelis, let's say some, could be anti-Ukrainian for historical reasons or other reasons. It doesn't mean that they embrace Putin. So Netanyahu has to take care of that. And let's remember, elections are not far away. And now lots of questions will be asked after the Gaza deal. And Netanyahu is very much concerned about how the audience sees him. So I don't think there's going to be, there are going to be tea parties between the Kremlin and the Israeli Prime Minister's office.
Okay, and one question on Iran, what you have already started talking about, Konstantin. This one is from Ian Bond in London. Kostya, great to see you. I wonder if you can say something about Russia-Iran relations. Moscow did nothing to help when Israel and the US attacked Iran. Has that undermined ties between Moscow and Tehran, or will Tehran look to Moscow for help with military technology and possible even rebuilding its nuclear program?
First of all, Ian, so lovely to hear from you reciprocally. Secondly, the answer to this question about not helping Iran is very clear. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, to some extent, Shara's visit and this whole basis issue is yet another proof that when big boys fight it out in the Middle East, when small boys have to sit quietly in the corner, and that's what happened. If Putin intervened, I'm sure that whatever Russia did would have been completely suppressed by the combined power of the Israelis and the Iranians. He didn't want to do that, also because of his relationship with Israel. Now, as far as I understand, they're trying to kind of patch it up with the Iranians. You heard it yourself, there are constant rumors of Russia shielding some Iranian scientists in Russian heartland. There is still cooperation on drone production. I'm sure there is technological cooperation between the two sides, but I do not think it will be expanded more because also Russia has to be very vigilant regarding OPEC Plus and this relationship with Saudi Arabia. And there are definitely unseen red lines which Russia doesn't want to overstep with regard to its relationship with the Saudis, Mohammed bin Salman and so on and so forth. And I'd say that it's also we're looking towards another natural regime change in Tehran. Ayatollah Khamenei is, 86, I think, and he doesn't have a lot of time to live. There are rumors that he's sick, even if he's not sick. We are looking towards a change at the top in Tehran, and this change will happen in completely new environment. And I wonder whether Moscow can impact the new leader, the new Rahbar, the new spiritual leader, I forgot the term, just as it could, Khamenei, who's been around for a long time. Also, quite a few of those people that started maintaining relationship with Moscow in the 90s under Yeltsin, like Rafsanjani and people like that, are simply dead. Some of them are dead because of old age. Some of them are dead because they were killed by the Israelis or the Americans. And I think that the moment things start to shift in Tehran, maybe Russia's political influence there will not disappear as long as that regime is there, but it will be much, much smaller. And we are not talking about a potential seismic regime change in case of popular uprising and Prince Reza coming back to Iran or whatever. I don't want to speculate, but definitely I think we're looking towards maybe a new generation coming to power in Iran and probably trying to maintain a more multi-vector policy. But here we have a very important element, which is not, strictly speaking, Middle Eastern, and that is Russia's war against Ukraine. If it does not end soon, it will still sap resources, and it will still show that Putin is incapable of winning this war, which is also being read by many people. The signals are being read by many people in the Middle East. And let us also, you spoke about, and you asked about Russia and Iran. Well, a significant part of Iranian air defense was based on Russian systems. What did we learn about them? We learned that they mean nothing. It's just pieces of metal. So that also impacts Russia's image in the Middle East and its relationship with its allies and friends.
And one more question, Konstantin, on the implications for Ukraine. Trump's success in this peace deal in the Middle East, in your view, could it embolden him to push harder on solving the conflict in Ukraine? Does it hold any leverage over Putin, maybe similar to what he had vis-a-vis Netanyahu, supporting him both and then pressuring him? Would that work or not at all?
Excellent observation, Katia, about the fact that Netanyahu also had to give up a few things. And this was a blow, especially to the most hardline members of his cabinet. With Russia, it's a bit different. Well, Russia has different potential, although we do know that Israel is a nuclear power too, but still. I think that for Putin, this war is an existential war. When he says it is a war against the West or against NATO, one has to believe him. He believes it too. And personally, I'm going probably to Kiev in the coming couple of months. Personally, my understanding is that this war will not end as long as Putin is in the Kremlin, or as long as he's not pushed to the negotiating table in all seriousness. To push him to the negotiating table, one has to employ massive pressure, and that means giving tomahawks to the Ukrainians, a green light to NATO allies where I live on the eastern flank to shoot down Russian drones and planes whenever they approach NATO airspace, and so forth. Maybe also some kind of extreme pressure, or maybe not on India as such, but let us say on Indian refineries and Chinese refineries that process Russian oil. That's very important. That's why Putin is clinging to sort of his relationship with Saudi Arabia. Without this, there will be no end to this war. In this respect, Trump can do nothing unless he realizes only force can push Putin to the negotiating table and towards kind of at least contemplating some kind of peace deal with Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much, Konstantin, for your insights. I wish we could keep going. There is so much more to unpack, but it's been extremely helpful, I'm sure, for our viewers to understand the situation better. Thank you for sharing your very profound knowledge of the region and, of course, of the domestic situation in Russia. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today, and see you again next week at the next briefing.
Thank you.